Hi, the main theme for this advanced module is workflow control, and there are two tools that are essential to controlling your Plusspec for SketchUp model. The first is layers and the second is scenes. Layers is the key to an efficient workflow, and I cannot stress the importance of layers enough. The good news is that Plusspec has automated the layers for everything that you draw using the Plusspec toolset. We recommend that you do not alter the default naming convention that Plusspec has set in place, as there are further complexities that you would need to understand before doing so. Even though Plusspec automates the vast majority of your layers, there will still be a degree of manual layer creation and manipulation. Essentially, layers allow you to categorize each item in your drawing so that you can easily control and identify every element in your model. Further to this, layers allow you to control the visibility of each category. Layer 0 is the default layer, and I recommend that any CAD lines or freeformed components, etc. are drawn on this layer. Therefore, ensure that the dot is always assigned to layer 0. Whatever layer the dot belongs to is the actual layer that you're going to draw it on. So for example, if you had set up a CAD line layer and you assign it on that layer with the dot, that means if you draw new lines, they're actually automatically going to be assigned to that layer. I always set mine to be defaulted to layer 0, and that way I can change it thereafter. And it will be more easily trackable if you do it this way. The type of manual layers that you will use will vary from project to project. Typically, the kinds of manual layers that I use often are CAD lines, line work from the plan and section cuts inside of Plusspec for SketchUp, and dividing your plan into separate floors. For example, if a project has multiple stories like this one, I create a layer called ground floor, first floor, and so on. And by creating a layer for each floor and assigning every component at that level to that floor layer, you will be able to better view your model. In effect, this process is simply a better modeling strategy. I will show you what I mean by that. If I go into my ground floor, you can see if I've left-clicked it, it's highlighted everything. And that's because I've assigned all of the elements that sit on the ground floor to the ground floor layer. So that's a manual layer, and I've called it ground floor. If I change the visibility of the ground floor, you will now see that everything on the ground floor has vanished. I didn't assign my stairs or my ramp to the ground floor layer because I like to see that separately. I probably should have assigned these to the ground floor layer. Also, if I get rid of my first floor, for example, you can see that my first floor is gone. Again, there are certain items that I was lazy and I didn't assign to the first floor, such as the landscaping, and that should have been assigned to that layer. And then, obviously, the roof layer. By being able to easily identify and change the visibility of each floor, it's just a really good modeling strategy. So if I really want to quickly go into the ground floor whilst in perspective mode, I can do it. If I don't set up scenes like this, I would actually have to go into my ground floor plan. However, that is going to be like an actual cut, and it's harder to model, I find, in that way, because it's in true 2D. You could use any naming conventions for your manual layers, but as suggested before, that we don't recommend that you would edit the default Plusspec layering naming convention. Plusspec has been created so that you can design and document faster and smarter. What you need to realize is that for some aspects of your model, you may be better to use the freeform SketchUp tools rather than model parametrically, and each project will be different. The hardest thing is knowing when to freeform model. Freeform modeling simply means any geometry that you have sketched and has not been produced with parametric constraints. SketchUp is the ultimate freeform modeling software, so with Plusspec you get the best of parametric BIM modeling and freeform modeling. This means that your imagination truly is your only limitation. We recommend that you limit the amount of freeform modeling and only use it if it would be faster and easier. In this model, I have freeformed the landscaping elements, some balustrading, some of the fixed furniture, the skylights, and the roof drains. I freeformed these elements because it was faster and easier, and they were highly customized. So I was not able to go to, for example, the Ruby Sketch library and find something that I could put in my model to represent them. It is very important that you categorize these elements by setting up manual layers. This will ensure that you will be able to control your modeling workflow as well as your presentation and 2D output. So you can see that in these layers I've set up, for example, extra layers for my ramp, for my stairs, fixed furniture, landscaping, skylight. So if I want to turn my skylights off, I can turn them off. And you can see that the glazing element of the skylight is what I'm talking about there. And the drains, for example. You will use scenes for two purposes, and you will use your scenes in conjunction with your layers. The first scene type are scenes that enable you to manage your modeling workflow easier. An example of this is the Plusspec roof off scene, or the structure, internal and external scenes. These scenes exist to simply allow you to model in a smarter way. The second scene type are scenes that you will use for presentation or 2D documentation purposes, such as perspectives, elevations, plans, and sections. The good news is that Plusspec has automated the majority of standard scene types for you and has also categorized them into different scene sets, for example, designing or estimation. However, you need to have a thorough understanding of how scenes work so that you can control your modeling workflow as well as your presentation and 2D output. Although Plusspec automates the standard scene types for you, you will want to modify them and create new ones. Every scene is controlled by your layers as well as the scene manager. The layers allow you to easily show or hide elements in your model and save it for that scene, but it is the scene manager that ultimately controls them. When you select a scene, right-click it and go into the scene manager. In the scene manager, it has certain properties. Properties control the memory of each scene. For example, if you want a scene to remember a set of camera location, you need to ensure that you tick the camera location box. So if you want a scene to remember an exact shadow, date and time, you need to tick the shadow settings box. And if you have taken a section, for example for plans, sections or details, you need to ensure that your scene remembers to activate the section by ticking the Active Sections plain box. I also recommend that you name each new scene so that you can easily track them. And I also suggest that you take some time to understand the different scene settings of each Plusspec scene. One of the important things to remember is if you want to create a new scene and you got View Animation Add Scene, it's actually going to remember the details of the last scene that you were in. So if you want certain things to come through, for example, camera location, shadow settings, active section planes, make sure that you go on a scene that had those activated from the start, or don't forget to actually tick them once you're in there. The other thing that's very important for scenes is to remember to update them. So if you change the camera location, if you change the style or sun settings and you want it to be remembered, you need to click on the scene and update it. There is also another way that you can control scenes, and you do this with styles. For the automated Plusspec scenes, a certain style has already been selected for you as a base template. However, it is up to you to decide how you want each scene to look, and you'll do this with the Style tool. For example, the Plusspec generated plans, sections and elevations use the hidden line black and white style. However, if this doesn't suit the way you want to present it, simply go onto the scene that you want to change and then choose another style type. So for example, You can also control the way each style looks. To do this, go into the edit, and then you can start to manipulate the lines, faces, edges, background, and so forth. So for example, the profiles have been set to 2, which means they're quite thick. You can turn them off, and it's going to thin it. You can also go into, for example, the what's called the modeling settings, and you can change the way that the section cuts appear. At the moment they've been set to 3, which is quite thick. You could set it to 1. Don't forget to right click on the scene and update it with your new changes before moving, otherwise you will lose your changes. And then you can either save as a new style, update the selected style, or do nothing. I'm going to save this one as a new style. And then, as iterated previously, you can then further manipulate each scene by the layers. So for example, if I wanted to turn off the grids, make the visibility invisible, and then again update it. I will now show you some of the sections that have been set up in this model, and I will illustrate how you can further control the way they are presented. This is a perspective section for presentation and schematic purposes. I've chosen the All 10, which is a generic Plusspec scene that was from the All, and I haven't actually modified it any further other than to turn the back edges on. This is a good presentation tool. In the scene manager, I've given it a name, and I've ensured that I've locked the camera location because I want it to return to this exact angle and perspective every time. I've ensured that all hidden geometry has been ticked, that all visible layers have been ticked, that it remembers that this is the active section plane. I've also set shadows and fog for this scene, and I wanted it to remember it, so I've ticked it, as well as the shadow and settings. This means that every time I return to section AA, it is remembered to pick up all of these elements. If I wanted to modify this scene, I can do so. For example, I can turn off the back edges. I can turn off the fog and the shadows. And now if I update this scene, if I go back to all and then back to section AA, it has now remembered all of those changes. I like to use fog for my presentation scenes as it shows the depth of field and softens the scene. You can control the way each of your plans and sections read by creating a face, and you can see that I have created a face which I have simply painted orange. I will show you how to do this from scratch. First, you need to go into Tools and then into your section plane, so you can take a new section cut. The one that you have placed has turned orange. Make sure that you select it, and now you can move it to position it where you want it to be. Once you're happy with the position, right click on it and then select Create Group from Slice. I then like to deactivate it. The next thing that you need to do is right click on it and make it a component. Now I like to select it and then make a duplicate copy to the side. It just means that I've got one that's in the model and I've got one off to the side where I don't have to worry about any of the geometry around the rest of the model. Then ensure that you double click into the component, and you can see now that I've got both activated. What you want to do is select everything and then start exploding it until you can't explode anymore. should be about it. A couple more. I can't do it anymore, so that's great. If this is for schematic purposes, I like to simply tidy it up, create the faces, and then illustrate the section with a color. So for example, you just need to create the faces, and then using the bucket tool, choose a color, and then just paint it on. And you'll go around the section until you have it looking how you want it to look. However, if this is for a detailed section, you can add any necessary lines, paint hatches, and so forth. Just take the time to tidy it up. Once you've done it a few times, you'll be surprised at how quick this actually is. If a section is at a scale of 1:100, I actually prefer to simply assign a color, as I am from the school of thought that a 1:100 section is more about the form and the space. However, do whatever suits your workflow. Once you are finished with your changes, the last step is to select the cut within the model and make it or move it in by 5 millimeters. This is to ensure that it remains visible within the section cut. So I'll show you what I mean by that. If I activate the section cut now, well, first of all, before I activate, I just want to select the section cut that I want to move it in by 5 millimeters. Now if I reactivate the cut, you can see that your changes have been picked up. I then make sure that you create a layer for these line work details. I normally use a layer called Model LW, and then I assign it to it. I do keep this one, and what I do is I just hide it. And the reason I keep it is that I use it to overlay in layout, and we'll be showing that in a more advanced layout tutorial so that you can further control the lines. In summary, the understanding of layers, scenes, and styles is integral to bettering your modeling workflow and your presentation and 2D output. The next topic that I want to discuss is how to further control your model by geolocating it and placing it on its site. I will also quickly explain how you can generate a rough contour plan from the Google Earth reference, as well as how you can actually manipulate a site to determine the cut and fill volumes. The geolocation tool is simple, but most new users get caught out by working off axes. Never work off axes. I'll now show you how you can geolocate your site. You need to go into Add Location. If you don't have it, go into your View toolbars and select the Google. Ensure that that box is ticked, and now you can press that button. Then you type in the address. This is a famous building, so I can actually look it up. So Google Earth has now picked it up. So what I can do is I can start to zoom out to pick up as much of the site as possible. Do note that the further you scroll out, the less accurate the contours will be. Then select your region. Once you're happy with it, just grab it. You can now see that it has been brought in. The site has been brought in at the 00 point and placed accurately. By the way, if you don't want to place a site, you can actually manually enter a geolocation by going into Windows, Model Info, Geolocation, and then choose to set a manual location. As you can see, the building does not sit perfectly north to south. Instead, it is off axis. The mistake that a lot of users make is to either rotate the site or to rotate the model. If you rotate the site, your shadows won't be accurate anymore. However, you can still model perfectly. So just don't use it for your sun studies if you do it this way. Never rotate your model off axes. If you do, you will lose the ability to model effectively and you will no longer be able to draw on axes. You will, for lack of a better word, be in for a world of hurt. The following is my suggested workflow. I have two files. One is my master file or my working file, and the other is my geolocated sun study final presentation file. In the master file, I unlock the site. I also unhide the contour element, and then I rotate the site so that it runs north to south. I can now position my building on the site, but I just won't use it for a sun study analysis. In the sun study version, I take a copy of my master file and then rotate it off axes so that it sits on the site perfectly, or that it is positioned perfectly on the site. And I never use this version to make any adjustments to my model. You just need to copy and paste your master file back into this sun study file as you make changes and delete the superseded version. I'll quickly show you what I mean by that. Right now, I would save this as a master file. I'll then save it again as my sun study file. Imagine this is my master file. What I want to do is I want to unlock this. I also want to go into my hidden geometry and, well, actually, no, don't do that. Just turn off your hidden geometry. That's a complicated way. Don't do that. All you need to do is now toggle on your terrain also. I also want to unlock it. And I'm going to select all of that and now press Edit, Unhide, Selected. Ignore that. The better way is to go back to your layers. So let's just turn off the hidden geometry again. Don't do this. Ensure that you use your layers, and this is a good example of why you should be using layers. What you want to do is just turn on your Google Earth terrain. So now you have both. Now you can select them and then you can rotate them. Then finally you can actually position your model on the site. This means that you can continue to make any modifications to your building without affecting your workflow. Just don't use it for sun study. If I go back a few steps, I'll now show you what I do for the actual sun study file. And that is, this time, I'm actually rotating the model off axes. So I'm placing it and then I'm rotating it. And you might need to keep on rotating it until you get it perfectly. But you need to remember that you can no longer make any changes to this actual model. If you have made a change to your master file, you simply need to copy it, paste it back in, place it on top of this model, rotate it so that you can easily rotate it to the exact angle, and then delete the one below and then drop it back onto the site. And you just need to do this every time that you make a change. It sounds complex, but it's actually very easy. The main thing is, do not actually have your master file or your working file that you've rotated off axes. If you have done it, you're better off to try and bring it back off the site, rotate everything. You're going to have to explode it. So just get in the habit from the outset, knowing never work off axes. As mentioned earlier, you can also generate a rough contour plan from the Google Earth site. Ensure that you have toggled on the Google contour, and I don't have it toggled, so I need to do it. Now what you need to do is just draw a big square using the rectangle tool that covers the entire site. Then group it, and now lower it so it no longer sits or intersects through the site. The next thing that you need to do is decide the spacings of your contours. For this demonstration, I'm going to do mine at 500mm elevations. And just before I do that, I'm just going to select everything and I'm just going to hide those things so I've ensured that they're a group. I'm just going to make it a group. And I'm just going to move it off the side so you can see it clearly. Now what you want to do is make a copy of this by bringing it up at the 500mm or whatever you've decided, and then times it by however many. I'm going to say 50 by using X and then 50. Now select everything and then select intersect with model. You can now delete those references and you can see that it has now put all the lines at 500mm levels. Please note that this is using the Google Earth satellite information and it should be used for a guide only. There are two different ways that you can model your site. The first is called a stepped site and the second is a face site. So this is an example of a stepped site. And this is an example of a face site. And you can see that I've got both here. If you want to manipulate the site significantly, I suggest that you use the stepped site option, as you can also produce the face site on top of this. However, the stepped site option will enable you to calculate the cut and fill volumes and to more easily manipulate the site itself. To generate a step site, you either need to trace a PDF or use the lines that you generated using the Google Earth contours, or obviously get the actual contours from a relevant consultant. So you can see this is an example where I've just traced a PDF and I've created the lines here, so I'm just going to move it out. I've turned it into a group and then all I need to do is enclose it. So I've created the faces. Now I can use the push and pull tool to manipulate it however it needs to be. So if it's 500mm intervals, type it in and I can start to step it out. For example, also, if you've used the push and pull tool and you've brought it up by 500mm, I don't have to retype it every time. I can actually leave it on the push and pull tool and now I can just double click and it's going to remember the last amount that I actually pushed and pulled by. Sometimes it's easier once you get higher just to actually go back and then just to retype. So that's the step site. For information on how to generate the face site, go to our YouTube channel and the Ruby Sketch YouTube channel, and this actually goes into, there's a tutorial that goes into how to actually generate this. So I'm not going to do it herein. But the step site enables you to actually manipulate the site. So all you need to do is at any time I can draw in more lines and then I can push and pull and I can really start to determine my cut and fill and how I want to position or manipulate the site. And this is an example of how I've done that to position the site accurately and also to determine my cut and fill. So I've just made sure that I've referenced all of the contours and then I've used the push and pull button to push it down, and for the ones that I'm cutting I've then painted red using the bucket tool, and for the ones I've actually added for the fill I have done the following, and I'll show you what I've done for that. There's a very good trick if you want to copy something but not have it related or part of that group. So for example, if I was to push and pull this is all part of this group, so I can't separate this new part. It's not its own individual element. However, if I copy this, get out of the group, and then select Edit, Paste in Place, I now have it. I can turn it into a group, and I can manipulate it separately. I can then go into the Paint Bucket tool and paint it a color. So I did this for both the cut and the fill. So you can see that's the overall site, but that is actually my cut element, and that is my fill element. And the good thing is that you can then determine the volumes. Now you need to ensure this kind of complex shape, you can't actually easily determine the volume, so you need to break it down further into sections. So each of my contours have been broken down into their own piece. From there I can simply right click it, go into entity info, and it will tell me the volume. And that way you can accurately determine your cut volume and your fill volume. The next thing that I want to show you is how to control your model with 3D details. There are 3 different workflow strategies for incorporating 3D details in your model. The first is to try and put as much detail in the model in its entirety. In other words, every element in your model contains every detail, so no matter where you take the section cut, it's going to have every element that you require. We do recommend against this, as it can affect your model size, and depending on the power of your machine, it can severely slow down your model. The second method is to create 3D details for the junctions where you need them only. So you would base it off of the Plusspec for SketchUp model. You can model it either off to the side, or you can create it in a new SketchUp and Plusspec file. And then what you can do is you just reinsert it. So for example, that's the detail. This is the actual model. You haven't modeled the entire element, rather you've just got an actual cut here, which is the model, which explains it in further detail, so that when you do take a cut, you would obviously focus on this detail, and you can hide the rest, but it's showing you what's actually happening in that junction. And obviously you can hide the cut, and then you can turn off perspective, and then you can align it properly. I'm not sure, it's the front. And then, as we discussed earlier, you can go into further detail, create a group from slice, and put in any extra information that you require, but you're better off doing it in the actual 3D detail itself. The third method is to keep the 3D details totally separate from the model itself, whilst still ensuring that they are accurately depicting the model. An example of this can be seen in Nick Saunders' workflow. And in that, Nick Saunders is just creating a completely different file, and then he's inserting this straight into layout. So this is the layout page, and he's just taking the screenshots that he needs from them and then annotates them directly, so they're not actually held within the model at all. You don't have to use 3D details. You could simply detail them in 2D, as we discussed earlier when I showcased making and editing sections by using a group from slice. However, we truly do believe that 3D details are the future. Once you've done a few of them, you'll be surprised at how easy they are to actually create. And once you have created a 3D detail, you can easily reuse them and quickly and simply adjust them to suit the conditions of another project. In summary, to expedite your learning curve in Plusspec for SketchUp, spend the time to understand the different ways that you can control your Plusspec model. Layers and scenes are integral to creating an effective workflow and for outputting presentation and 2D documentation. Never work off axes. If you need to, create different types of files and save them separately. So for example, a master file, a sun study file, and a detail file or detail files. Also, understanding the freeform modeling capabilities of SketchUp is something that you should also take the time to understand. Having the best of parametric and BIM modeling as well as freeform modeling provides you with total design freedom. Understanding the freeform modeling capabilities of SketchUp is something that you must take the time to understand. You want to have total design freedom, and Plusspec with SketchUp provides you with this. And one of the things that we did not discuss is that if you freeform something, make sure that you use the Plusspec BIM tool to ensure that it is captured in your takeoff and specification. The BIM tool essentially makes dumb geometry smart. So even if you are not overly concerned with the takeoff, you should always get in the habit of using it. This is a freeform custom element. It was easier for me to freeform it. So what I should do is go into the BIM tool and make it smart. Give it a name. You can even assign it a brand, an item code. Make sure that's on the layer that you want. You can even put location notes and other notes in there, as well as an install price and a purchase price. I won't be going into any specific SketchUp tools, but if you go to our website, we have a link to SketchUp specific tutorials, so do ensure that you take the time to check them out. These tutorials are located here in the Plusspec website under Tutorials SketchUp. Do ensure for modeling that you go and check out our Plusspec related beginners advanced tips and tricks also. Finally, please subscribe to our RubySketch YouTube channel. We are constantly releasing new tutorials to help you. Our aim is to enrich your workflow and to make your business more profitable. Moreover, if you have any questions, please sign up to our forum, as this is the ideal location to ask them. We actively respond to the forum questions, and the answers benefit the community at large. Thanks.